Act 2, Scene 3 is a kind of a masterpiece. Now you might think, Mr. Salles, are you serious? Is Macbeth having a laugh? And the answer is yes, I am. Now to understand that, you need to understand the origins of tragedy. So Aristotle, he's writing about 300 years before Jesus, and he defined tragedy as a play which arouses pity and fear, and then the action of the play leads to the audience being cleansed of these emotions, which he called catharsis. Well, Shakespeare comes along 1800 years later, and he thinks, well, we can get to catharsis even better if we introduce humour. The scene that has directly preceded the one we're about to look at involves the porter, and the scene before the porter is the killing of Duncan. The killing of Duncan is virtually the worst thing imaginable in Jacobean England, and so it's not even portrayed on stage, it's just too terrible, and instead the catharsis begins with this humorous scene with the porter talking about sex, alcohol, and Catholics, who you should know were a very dirty word at the time. I won't go into that now, other than to make the point that humour is the antidote to the tragedy of killing Duncan. Now let's dive into Act 3, Scene 2. Lennox comes along and makes small talk with Macbeth. Some say, the earth was feverous and did shake, says Lennox, and Macbeth's reply is genius in its timing, bearing in mind what he was like after he'd just killed Duncan. Great Neptune's oceans were never going to clean his hands of the blood. The guilt was going to stick to him forever. So severe was his guilt that he would never sleep again. He heard a voice saying, Macbeth shall sleep no more. Macbeth had murdered sleep, and so on. We had all that melodrama, and now, what does Macbeth say? 'Twas a rough night. In other words, he's just making fun of the murder he's just committed. Lennox is saying, there was an earthquake, it was feverous and the earth did shake, and Macbeth saying, yeah, it was a bit rough, wasn't it? Like totally downplaying what's going on. Now his reason for that is the Jacobean belief in the great chain of being. That's illustrated here, with God at the apex of this chain. There's the chain, and as you move down the links, you move down the status, not just in society, but all the natural world. So the idea here is that all the kings and queens are appointed divinely by God, and then you get lesser ranks of humanity organised underneath in a kind of pyramid structure, as weaker links in the chain. So to kill a king and commit regicide was as close as you could get to killing God, because they were appointed by God to rule. So when Macbeth says this to minimise what he's done to Lennox, he's also having a little bit of a laugh with God. What are you going to do about it, he's saying. I've killed Duncan and I'm going to get away with it. Then we have another bit of humour from Shakespeare. When Macduff tries to describe the murder of Duncan, he can't seem to just speak in facts. Instead, he just speaks in personifications and metaphor. Confusion now hath made his masterpiece, he said, which is bizarre because a masterpiece is a great work of art. And so his language suggests that killing Duncan has been a fantastic achievement, although very confusing. Then his language changes, most sacrilegious murder, and what he means here, of course, is that the murder is a challenge against God, and therefore it's sacrilegious, and murder has broken open the Lord's appointed temple. Well, obviously, what he means here is that the king is appointed by God, and therefore he is like the temple of God. But he's also comparing Duncan to a temple here, and then he's just become a mere building. It's as though in the great chain of being, Duncan has suddenly plummeted from his position as king, equivalent to the temple, down through the links to a mere building. In other words, his language contains the idea that maybe Duncan wasn't that worthy to be king. Of course, Macduff would never say this. But this layering of metaphor on metaphor and metaphor becomes incredibly confusing. Well, this is what Macbeth does. What is it you say? The life? In other words, he's saying, what on earth are you talking about, mate? You're not making any sense. Effectively, he's making fun of Macduff. And even Lennox says, mean you his majesty? So even Lennox, who doesn't have a reason to mock Macduff, simply says, "You're talking rubbish. What do you mean?" And this juxtaposition of comedy with tragedy is the same thing he did with the porter scene. Now, when Malcolm and Donalbain, the king's two sons, enter to find out what's happened, Macbeth again mocks Macduff's language. Instead of saying to them, "Your father is dead," when they ask, "What's amiss?" he says, "You are and do not know it. The spring, the head, the fountain of your blood is stopped. The very source of it is stopped." So again, he's gone straight to extended metaphor here. Duncan is the king, like a spring. Then he means the head of the spring, the origin of it in the mountains. And then he means a fountain gushing blood. So mixed metaphors, they change all the time through his sentence, which is just what Macduff did here. He's basically making fun of Macduff to his face. This is such a clear signal that he's saying to Macduff, "I killed Duncan and I'm going to get away with it." He's just pointing out his superiority to Macduff. He also has another very perverse joke here. So Macbeth and Lennox and Ross have all been to see the dead king. Presumably Lennox and Ross have stayed, and Macbeth has nipped out quickly, found the king's grooms, his guards, and immediately killed them, and then come out at the same time as Lennox and Ross. So his murder of the guards must have been pretty damn quick. And instead of confessing what he's done here, he actually gives this long speech about how terrible it is that the king is dead, then waits for Malcolm's reaction, then waits for Lennox explaining that it was the grooms who obviously killed Duncan because they were covered in his blood, with bloody daggers on their pillows, and then Macbeth says, "Oh, by the way, I've just killed them." Now that's taken up quite a bit of stage time, where Macbeth is just standing there looking as innocent as you like. Well, more than that, all eyes are on him as he comes in because he delivers his speech. This means that there must be no blood on him. This has been a very efficient kill. It's the murder of an assassin, totally unlike the bloodthirsty way that he killed Duncan. In other words, he disguises the fact that he's killed them until he can reveal it at a time when he wants. It's almost as though he's delivering it as a punchline to a joke, because he could have come on straight away and boast that he's killed the assassins who killed Duncan. So why doesn't he do that? Well, here's a really horrible idea that I think works quite well. He's actually doing this to really annoy his wife. All the methods that Lady Macbeth has used to persuade him to kill Duncan have been an attack on his manhood. She's emasculated him. She's come up with the plan, she's told him what to do and when, and she's embarrassed him when he couldn't take the daggers back. So what he's actually saying here is a message to his wife. Yeah, you thought you were so clever, you thought you had a plan. Well, I'm doing my own thing, baby, and you're just going to have to follow my lead. I'm the man in charge. And then, of course, this leads to her fainting, which may be put on or may be real, but it's a direct response to her having to change the plan again, because Lady Macbeth knows now they are under suspicion. "Wherefore did you so?" says Macduff. Instant suspicion. So if we put Macbeth on the psychiatrist's couch here, we can definitely see that he's in a battle for power and influence within his own marriage. We can't see him as losing control when he kills the guards. I used to think that, but the staging of this shows that it was very controlled. That's why there's no blood on him, and he can stand on stage with nobody realising what he's done, because he's also done it so efficiently in the time it takes Lennox and Ross to join him and come back to the original party. And so when we return to the question, is Macbeth having a laugh? Yes, I think he is. That's a symbol of how powerful he feels. He feels he can get away with it. He feels he can re-establish his dominance in the marriage that he's lost through the killing of Duncan. And he's also been very happy to make an enemy of Macduff right here. And that, of course, is what's going to lead to Macduff's killing of Macbeth at the end of the tragedy. Now, if you'd like to find out more easy ways to get grades 8 and 9, check out the videos appearing up here and here. Or just cut to the chase and buy my amazing guide, which has over 20 grade 9 essays in it as part of your notes. See you soon on my channel.